Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. You probably know Blackbird as Paul McCartney's hauntingly beautiful tribute to the American Civil Rights Movement, but you might not realize that underneath the surface it's a fairly complex piece of harmonic writing, too. It hides a lot of its more technical elements really well, but trust me, McCartney was not messing around here. It starts like this. And already we've got some things we need to talk about. First of all, there's this note here. It's a G played on an open string of the guitar, and he plays it after every chord in this section. Actually, he plays it after every single chord in the entire song, making it what's known as a pedal or a drone, where a single note is repeated over and over regardless of the surrounding harmony. It sort of fades into the background, becoming an almost rhythmic element that's not really a part of the chord, even though it seems like it should be. But if we're not counting it, that leaves us with another problem. He's only playing 2 notes at a time, and the smallest chords we tend to use are 3-note triads. Sometimes Paul helps us out by filling in the missing notes with a melody, but other times we just have to guess, so unsurprisingly, not everyone agrees on what exactly he's playing all the time. It's tricky, but we'll do our best. The other thing we need to talk about is the rhythm. Normally, we'd expect to see a consistent pattern of accents throughout the song, and for the most part, we do. Everything is grouped into bars of 4 or occasionally 2 beats, except here. Listen to it again and count the beats. Yeah, there's 7. That's interesting on its own, but more interesting to me is the fact that I didn't even notice it the first time I listened to the song, and I kinda suspect you didn't either. Okay, maybe you did, but most people don't, so what gives? Well, instead of thinking of it as 7 beats, let's think of it as a group of 4 and a group of 3. Now the question is which? The first 4 beats sound like a complete bar of music, whereas the second 4 beats do too. Huh. Weird. Anyway, I think that's the secret. We've got 2 reasonable 4-beat bars, and it's not clear which of them got shortened to make the progression we hear, so it's pretty easy to miss that one of them did. By the time you get to the point where it's obvious a beat got dropped, it's no longer relevant, so you don't really notice. But enough about rhythms, let's talk chords. Again, ignoring the G pedal, we have this. It may seem weird to call this a G chord when there's no G in it except the drone, but he's also singing that note in the melody, so I think this is the best name for it. Anyway, this section is basically just a big old pile of G major, interrupted briefly by this passing A minor, which just adds a little ornamentation on top of the otherwise static harmony. But that's just the beginning. Let's get into the verse. I'm gonna stop it there for a second. This bit has 2 separate parts sort of interwoven together. The first is these 3 chords, which are a pretty straightforward progression. It starts on C major, the 4 chord. Different chords in a key have different functions or jobs, and the 4 chord typically has what's called subdominant function, meaning it introduces instability and leads you away from more consonant tonic function chords like the G major from earlier. After that, the song moves to D major, the 5 chord, which has dominant function. These are really unstable chords that point you back to the tonic, but instead of going to G major, McCartney plays what's called a Deceptive Resolution, where the 5 chord resolves up to the 6 minor. This is also a tonic function chord, so it still provides some rest, but it's not the actual root of the scale, so it also keeps a bit of forward momentum. But this isn't just a simple 4-5-6 progression. Instead, before each chord, Paul inserts another one that helps set it up. This is called a secondary dominant because it sets up a resolution like a dominant chord, but it doesn't actually go back to the root of the key like the primary dominant would. So we have this A7, which resolves to D major, and this B7 that goes to the E minor. These add more direction and color to the progression, but they don't change its underlying shape. Anyway, next we have this bit, where the E minor moves to E flat major in what's called modal interchange, where a chord is borrowed from a different scale. E flat major isn't in the key of G major, which we're actually in, but it is in G minor, so we can just steal it to give ourselves a slightly weird but still recognizable sound. Then it goes back down to D major, then C sharp diminished, then C major, then to C minor, another example of modal interchange. We could talk about functions again here, but I think what's going on is even more obvious than that. Let's strip away the drone and the top note and just listen to the bass movement for this section. It starts by walking up a half step at a time, and then it just walks right back down. This mirrors the lyrics, where the first half is an uplifting message like take these broken wings and learn to fly, whereas the second half is a somber reflection on how all your life until now, you couldn't. After that, we have this, which is pretty straightforward. The G majors are, of course, still tonic function chords. This D chord may look a little complicated, but in practice it works pretty much the same as the D major from earlier, making it a dominant function chord that wants to resolve back to G, and this A7 is, again, a secondary dominant chord that wants to resolve to some sort of D chord, which it does. Also, starting at the C major and continuing onward, the top note line plays this, which mirrors the bass's descending half-step motion from earlier. Then there's this turnaround, which is almost exactly like the bit we just looked at and works the same way. And finally we have the chorus, I've seen some people call this a C major chord because the melody is hanging on a C for the first part of it, but I think calling it E minor does a better job illustrating what's happening here, which is that we're just walking down a scale. Specifically, we're walking down a mode called G Dorian, which is like G minor but with a raised 6th degree. The first time through the progression we end on the 4 chord, C major, whereas the second time through, we end instead on an A7, which is still a secondary dominant for a D chord, but instead of the D major we've been using, it goes to D minor 7, which is what we'd expect to see in G Dorian. D minor 7 doesn't really work as a dominant function chord, but McCartney uses it like one anyway, resolving back to this, and starting over. How does that work? Well, the only note different between D minor 7 and D dominant 7 is the 3rd degree, and he doesn't actually play either one, so it's kind of unclear which chord it's meant to be. The melody briefly sings some F naturals, which implies the minor 7, but it's ambiguous enough that combined with a proper bass motion for a dominant resolution, it's easy to miss. And I think that's kind of what he's doing for the whole song. It's full of things that seem fine if you're not paying any attention, but if you take the time to actually examine them, they're pretty clearly wrong. Which, if you think about it, is actually a pretty good metaphor for the conditions African Americans faced in the 1960s when many laws were still built on the idea of separate but equal services, a friendly-sounding name for blatant discrimination. So was that metaphor intentional? I don't know, maybe. You'd have to ask Paul McCartney. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to Patreon patron Bart Shermans for suggesting this song. If you'd like to see your favorite song analyzed, just head on over to Patreon and pledge at any level. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and keep on rockin'.